Hello, friends. Welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. It's great to have you here with me. And my guest today is an expert on the New Age. Perhaps you have some New Age beliefs and you're not even aware of it, but there is a good chance that you know someone who has a belief that would fall under New Age, although they may not even say that. They might not say, I have New Age beliefs. So today it's a very important show, a couple of episodes that we're going to be doing with Marcia Montenegro. Marcia, welcome back to Colliding Worldviews.
Hi, Tony. It's so good to be back with you. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you here, and I want to give our audience a little bit of your background. Friends, Marcia practiced as a professional astrologer for 8 years. She took astrological classes for over 2 years, and she even passed a 7-hour exam given by the Atlanta Board of Astrology Examiners. Now, for years, she was involved in the New Age, occult, and Eastern beliefs and practices, including inner consciousness, Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Hindu teachings and meditation, and psychic development classes. During these years, she also participated in past life regression, numerology, tarot cards, spirit contacts, seances, astral travel, and received a spirit guide through a guided visualization. However, by God's grace, she repented of her sins and put her trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. And now her mission is to educate people about this. Her website is christiananswersforthenewage.org, a website that you'll definitely want to check out. She's also an author of a book as well that you really need to get, called Spellbound, The Paranormal Seduction of Today's Kids. Marcia, you have a wealth of information on your website. Now, is the New Age passé? I mean, we don't hear that term too much anymore. Is it ended, or is it alive and well in the minds of people throughout the world?
We don't hear the term very much anymore. That's true, Tony. And the reason is not because it's disappeared or faded away. It's because it's mainstreamed into the culture. The New Age is very flexible and adaptable. And when there is any opening in the culture or there are other ideas that are compatible with the New Age will just get in there. It's not because there is some mastermind behind the scenes, orchestrating this. It just is the nature of the New Age to blend in. And so the New Age has done that with psychology. It's done it in the schools, in the workplace, in sports, and even New Age practices get into the church. So it's actually very mainstream, but not as visible, and it's well disguised. So that's why a lot of people think it has faded away.
There are, I'm sure, are a lot of people out there who have these beliefs that would fall under New Age, quote unquote. They have no idea that that's the case. They don't call themselves a New Ager, quote unquote. How do you define New Age, though, and what are its roots? Let's educate people about that.
Yes, I like to address that because so many people don't really understand what it is. The New Age, first of all, comes from three main areas. It comes from Gnosticism, which goes way back. It comes from New Thought, and it comes from Eastern spirituality. So Gnosticism, which was really the first enemy of the church, and you go back to the first century when there was the beginnings of Gnosticism, and even find that, for example, First John addresses some of that, and Colossians addresses some of that. But Gnosticism saw the material world as evil and believed we were all spirits trapped in bodies. Then you have Eastern spirituality, which actually has some similarity with Gnosticism. Eastern spirituality tends to deny that this physical world is real. Or they say it's a very impermanent kind of existence, and that we are to go beyond that. In order to realize truth, we have to see that this is a false reality. that who we think we are is false, and we have to come to a realization of the truth, which is called enlightenment. And Hinduism, Taoism, and Buddhism all teach this. Now, there are distinctions in how they teach this, so it's not exactly the same, but that's the basic idea. And then you have New Thought. New Thought is a more recent movement that started. It started in the 18th century, but it didn't really take off until the 1800s, the 19th century, and the early 20th century. And New Thought claims to be Christian, but New Thought teaches that man is innately divine. Jesus was a man who realized his divinity, and therefore he achieved Christ consciousness. And Christ consciousness is something we can all achieve. So Jesus modeled this for us. And that is another big influence on the New Age. The New Age actually took a lot of New Thought and incorporated it. But New Thought is still a distinctive movement from the New Age. They are not one and the same thing. However, it can be confusing because the New Age will say the same things that New Thought says. So let me just give some examples. For instance, the idea in the New Age that your body is a reflection of your spirit, and that in order to treat health problems, you have to treat this invisible spiritual body is very Gnostic. There's also the idea in the New Age that we're made up of vibrations, and to advance spiritually, to go higher on the spiritual path, we have to raise our vibration. And this actually lowers the material density of your body. Some people take it to extremes and believe that you actually can kind of disappear, and they'll teach that Jesus, when he ascended, was not really ascending, but he had transcended the material limits of this reality. So there's this big emphasis on the non-material in the New Age, and that's Gnostic and also related to the Eastern views. There's also the view that you have a divine self within you that you must awaken to. You must come to realize you have this divine nature. This is very much like Hinduism, and in Buddhism teaches there's no self at all. But Buddhism has techniques that are easily adaptable, certain meditation techniques that have become very popular in the culture, like mindfulness. And then the ideas in the New Age about Jesus are very much like New Thought, that Jesus attained this Christ consciousness, and that is what we need to do. And so you can hear some New Agers talk about Jesus and talk about God, and up to a point, they may actually sound Christian. It's possible for that to happen. You have to sometimes keep digging and exploring and look further, or you have to find out what they mean by the terms they're using. So if they use the term God or Jesus, you have to find out, what do you mean by that? And I have seen a lot of Christians deceived by New Thought because it does appear to be Christian. For example, the Unity Church can sound very Christian. They have a prayer guide. They have this little booklet they send out to people. I've known Christians who have told me that they used to get that and they thought it was okay. Now, if you really look carefully, you can usually see it's not okay, but sometimes people, I guess they just kind of rationalize it, or they think, well, maybe that's not what it really means. Or, people don't want to think they're wrong, and they don't want to think they're being deceived. So it's easy to make excuses and kind of gloss over it. So that's one thing about the New Age, is that it can be very subtle. But those are the three main sources of the New Age. And I want to emphasize that it's a network and it has a spectrum to it. So you can go from one spectrum to the other, and you can find people in all areas. So you might find some people, for example, very involved in Buddhism or Hinduism who are New Agers. And then you might find some who are involved in the more Gnostic kind of secret teaching aspect of the New Age. And then you can find some who are into the New Thought, and they'll really be into ideas like you have infinite inner potential, you can achieve anything, and you can create things with your mind and words. And this is very popular. There was a very popular book and video that came out about 12 years ago called The Secret, or maybe 13 years ago, which was publicized by Oprah. And The Secret was nothing more than rehashed New Thought. And it teaches the idea that you can create things with your mind and with your words because you have a divine nature. So you have all of those aspects, and not every New Ager is into all three of those aspects. But you can find people that mix things together. And I think that's what makes it so confusing and hard to pin down.
Now, there are people out there who have these different beliefs, and they may just think it's a simple belief that people shouldn't be concerned about, that there's nothing inherently wrong with it or evil about it necessarily. That it's just an innocent belief saying, hey, I'm not religious, I don't go to a particular church, I'm just spiritual. And they don't see any problem with it. They almost see it as there's less issues with this because I don't have the issues of a church building and all the people who were there and organized religion, quote unquote, and all the problems that come along with that. But is there a more sinister aspect of this that people need to know about? Is there a difference between the New Age and the occult, which most people would say, oh, yeah, that's not good, but they don't ever think about any relationship between the New Age and the occult?
Yes, that's correct. The New Age does, often people in the New Age will use occult practices, but they have a New Age worldview. And it does tend to seem more benign. The New Age always appears helpful, positive, and benign, always. The occult, I define the occult as a set of practices that can be aligned with various beliefs. And the occult falls into three categories, which is sorcery, spirit contact, and divination. Divination is sometimes called fortune telling. And those are the three areas of the occult. And people who have a focus on the occult practices and the occult worldview tend to have a different kind of way of looking at things than New Agers. For example, people in the occult tend to be more here and now oriented. They're oriented towards the idea of I'm here and I'm going to make the best use of my energies or my power. And this is a tool, that I'm going to use. So I'm going to go into witchcraft, or I'm going to use tarot cards or astrology. And they're focused on sometimes harmonizing themselves with Earth, which would be modern Wicca and witchcraft. Now, in the New Age, you can have a New Ager who does astrology, which of course is what I did. But I was a New Ager, and I had the New Age worldview, which is more transcendent and future oriented. So New Agers tend to be very focused on spiritual evolvement and usually believe in reincarnation and how am I going to be advancing in my future spiritual lives. So I need to learn my lessons from my past life now, which would be the karma. I need to work out my karma. And so New Agers tend to be more focused on this future and this transcendent than people who are totally guided by occult beliefs. Also, another difference is that the New Agers tend to look for something that seems more spiritual, something more about the soul and spirit than do people in the occult. But that's one of the dangers of the New Age, is that it does appear helpful and beneficial. And one big area, which I didn't mention earlier, where the New Age is in the culture, is alternative healing. So most alternative healing is based on spiritual views, some of which come from Taoism and some of which come from Hinduism, and not based at all on science or objective data or testing. But it appears very helpful in people who get disappointed with the medical world or have bad experiences, get drawn to the alternative world. And I have known people who actually got involved in the New Age through alternative healing.
And how do you see it when you look at the culture today and you see the kids growing up who, obviously, you as an apologist, Marcia, know many Christian students out there don't know what they believe and why they believe it. They're becoming victims of ideas like this when they talk with their friends who seem to be very spiritual and enjoy it. And we just see this throughout the culture in different ways. How do you see this in the culture and the future of the culture when it includes this?
Yes, well, right now, I have to say, I have been somewhat astounded by how fast the New Age has accelerated in the culture. Watching things like mindfulness just grow by leaps and bounds. Um, Seeing people who don't realize they're getting involved in New Age ideas and practices. For example, I've seen an increase of a belief in energy, and in the New Age, the idea that we're all energy and everything is energy and we're all part of this energy is very basic in the New Age. Well, I have seen actually even Christians start to adopt these ideas about energy and accessing God's energy for healing, for example. Or God is in everything because his energy, his breath is everywhere. People will misuse the idea of God's breath. In the Bible, we see that, God breathed life into Adam. Well, of course, that's a way of saying God gave life to Adam. He created his body and he gave him life, so he became a living human being. It doesn't mean literally God breathed breath into Adam, because God doesn't have breath. God is spirit. He doesn't need to breathe, and he doesn't have lungs to breathe with. So God doesn't have any breath. But I have seen Christians pick up on this idea of, and it's even in some Christian songs, the breath of God, and I'm breathing God. This idea that his breath is in everything and permeates the creation. And these are very unbiblical concepts that actually are very New Age and pantheistic. So I am concerned, because I feel that since people don't understand what the New Age is and think it's gone away, that they're more vulnerable to these teachings. We really need to teach more in the churches how to properly interpret Scripture. Not just know Scripture, not just know the Bible, but how do you properly interpret it so that you don't fall for these ideas where they're taking things out of context and they're misinterpreting them. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I wanted to make those points. So,
Marcia, there are many Christians out there who are Christians in name only. Maybe they go to church. They don't read the Bible on their own. They don't read good books. They don't read theology, philosophy, apologetics, etc. Although the Bible's the most important, but they aren't even really reading that. They're just listening to the pastor, who may never really explain it in context the way that we really need to have it, verse by verse, expounding on what the author meant when he actually wrote whatever letter or epistle or portion of the Bible that was written down. But it's so easy for people to fall for these lies, especially when they sound like they're okay. there's nothing that sounds inherently bad or wrong about them. It almost sounds like this person is maybe closer to Christ because of the lingo that they're using and stuff. But how can Christians get involved in the New Age without even realizing it?
Well, I think one way, as I mentioned, was through alternative healing. I have seen that happen. I have seen some people get into it through yoga, because yoga is at its heart a spiritual practice. And even if it's presented as exercise, because it has a spiritual element to it, if the person continues on in yoga, it gets actually more and more spiritual. It's hard to advance in yoga without coming up against the spiritual teachings that underlie it. So I have seen people get into it. I've also talked to people who were doing it and then all of a sudden noticed how spiritual it was getting, and they left it. They stopped doing it. I think some of the ideas in the culture, just the postmodern ideas that no one has absolute truth, and that everybody can kind of have their own take on what's true, that can open somebody up to New Age ideas. And there's something called progressive Christianity, which actually aspects of progressive Christianity overlap with the New Age. And some of the progressive Christian leaders and spokespersons have actually admire some New Agers and have some New Age beliefs. And yet it appears to be Christian because these people will say, well, I believe the Bible, I believe in Jesus, and they're using all the lingo, but they're meaning something else. So what I urge people to do is to, investigate. You need to see what the person means by that. There's just lots of ways people can get sucked into this. And because it can sound Christian and it seems so helpful and positive, people sometimes don't want to check. They just accept it at face value and they don't investigate.
Definitely. And I think the most the list of things that you just mentioned there, I mean, some of them are rather obvious. I think the very first one is the one that kind of maybe throw people for a loop a little bit, and that is when you talked about yoga. When you say if you stay doing it too long. Now, I mean, does that mean like if you hold the yoga stretch too long, or do you mean like if you actually get into it to where you're actually studying yoga and reading books on yoga and that kind of stuff? I mean, is there a distinction between studying it versus just doing stretches that these actually are yoga stretches I didn't know kind of thing? What is the fine line there on what person could do that is labeled yoga without getting into everything else that comes along with it?
Right. Well, here's the thing. Yoga is not stretching. And that is one of my, to kind of make a pun, is one of my mantras. Yoga is not stretching. Just regular stretching that you do, and there are just normal stretches, is not yoga. Yoga has very precise asanas. That's the term for the yoga positions. They're called asanas, and they have to be done in a certain way, accompanied by a certain way to breathe. Sometimes you hold them for a certain amount of time. I think if you're taking anything that's called yoga, I think you're already in trouble, because if you find that you like it, you may let your guard down and you may let your discernment down and accept some things in it that you don't realize are not good, such as the energy teaching, or something about the spiritual body, okay, because there's no spiritual body. Now, but when I say that, I'm not talking about when it talks about the spiritual body we'll have on the resurrection. That's not what I mean. In the New Age, the spiritual body is this invisible body that you work with, and that needs to be healed. So that's what I'm talking about. But when you come across these terms, or chakras, I have actually come across Christians who believe there are chakras. Well, the chakras don't exist. They just don't exist. It's part of Hindu spirituality. So pretty much getting into any yoga is already opening a door for trouble. But what I meant by if you stay in it, I meant as you go through, like you start off at the beginning, and then there's usually intermediate levels, and then of course advanced levels. You can't go very far past the beginning without encountering spiritual concepts. But another problem with this is that many studios that teach yoga, especially in gyms or the YMCA or something like that, will take out the spiritual language and they will not use the Hindu terminology. They'll just call it something else. I'll give you an example. As far as children go, they have yoga for children, and they don't use the Hindu terms at all, of course. They use like animal terms. So, we're going to crouch like a tiger, or we're going to stretch, or we're going to stand like a flamingo or something. And they do the same with adults, maybe not with animals, but they'll use terms that are not the technical terms, and therefore you can not even realize that you're doing yoga, possibly. I just think whenever you do any kind of exercise anywhere, you need to check out what it's based on, because the New Age has so permeated the health field and the exercise field that it's actually hard to find things that aren't touched by it.
Marcia, this has been quite helpful and educational for people. Friends, Marcia has a master's degree in religion from Southern Evangelical Seminary, a great school. Again, she's an expert on the New Age and just about everything that has to do with it. As you can hear, just go to ChristianAnswersForTheNewAge.org. Also, pick up her book called Spellbound, and you can get a lot of her articles. She's writing articles all the time on this. Again, she is the go-to person on this topic. If you want to learn more about it, or if you want to help educate other people who don't understand what they're doing, but you do. Marcia, thank you so much for being here today on Colliding Worldviews.
Thank you, Tony, very much.
Friends, please check out avnsat.com and trinitychannel.com, and you can find out also, too, on the Trinity Channel YouTube channel, all the shows that we do here on Colliding Worldviews and the other shows that Trinity Channel does as well. And also think about this. We need to get the gospel out there to all people. And it's not just Muslims, who, of course, we focus a lot on here on Colliding Worldviews, and Islam, and all the different Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, world religions that are out there. It's also the things like this, the New Age movement that isn't really apparent as far as a religion, quote unquote, but is a lie in and of itself. So God bless you, and we'll see you next time here on Colliding Worldviews.